morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining our webinar. Today, our webinar is Why Product Traceability Matters, and it's brought to you by Barber ABI and BSI. This call is being recorded and will be available for replay later. I'd like to hand you over to Dan Rossiter, our chair from BSI. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Charlie, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion panel on why product traceability matters. We're going to have a very interesting conversation today, and we're going to look at really how things like digital innovation can be used to improve productivity, efficiencies, and safety through robust product identification. And to do so, I've got a broad array of speakers here to join. So I want to quickly introduce each of them if they want to just give a very quick hello back as I go around. So first, providing us with the manufacturer's view, I'd like to welcome Adam Turk, CEO from Siderise. Hi, Adam.
Morning.
From the designer's view, I'd like to welcome Carl Collins, Head of Digital Engineering at Ccpi.
Good morning. This is actually me. I'm not Dan Rossiter.
Thanks, Carl. From the builder's view, I'd like to welcome Dagan Herkelson, Head of Supply Chain at Berkeley Group.
Good morning.
Hi, Dagan. And then to round us off as well, providing the manager and maintainer's view, Kath Fontana, Managing Director at Mighty PLC.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Kath. Thank you all for joining. So we'll start off with an easy one, and then what I'll also say to the audience as well, thank you for joining, and this is meant to be a dynamic discussion panel, so there is the option to provide Q&A as part of this. So as we're talking, if anything you find particularly interesting, you're more than welcome to chuck it in the question and answers panel, and I will pick it up as we go. We purposely don't have enough questions for today's session, so please throw your questions in. Otherwise, we'll start to go off-piste. So make sure you get your questions in because we want to hear your problems and whether we can help out. So to start us off, though, I will ask a broad question, and we'll go around perhaps in the order I introduced you in, which means Adam, as a warning, that means I'll come to you first.
Okay.
Is that what do you each find is the biggest challenge for your respective audiences? So for Adam, for you, that's from the manufacturing side. Carl from the designer side, Dave from the builder side, and then Kath from the kind of manager maintainer side. What are the biggest challenges that you respectively face relating to products and their identification? So Adam, if you'd like to start.
Dan, thanks very much indeed. It's a really good question because you get a lot of people working with products at different stages of the supply, be that at design stage or on site, when they're installing the product, but also with maintenance, with replacement of products, etc. And you just, I mean, our business is continuously inundated with customers asking questions about what product have I got? Have I got the right product? Is this the product for this application? And so there's an awful lot of work goes on in terms of helping our customers understand what products they have in front of them at the time, and that's why we were so keen to be an early adopter ourselves of the BSI Identify program.
Well, fantastic. We might hear about that bit later, but I guess then that's the manufacturing side. Carl, from a designer's point of view, what are some of the challenges?
I think from the designer's perspective, there's actually two distinct challenges. The first challenge is when we design, we would usually design products in the generic and then turning a generic into the specific. So the constructor has actually got something to install. So understanding what the specific is and how it relates to the generic is really important. And the second point, I think, is one of the emerging topics. We've been doing this for years, but I think it's becoming more and more important. It's retrofit and refurb. So understanding what products are actually in a building that you want to retrofit or refurbish. Traditionally, we've just looked at what's on the boilerplate on the side of the capital equipment, but that doesn't really tell us the full story. So being able to identify a thing and trace back all of its product data, I think will be a massive boost to the retrofit and refurbishment market.
Thank you, Carl. And then sort of shifting through there, then Dagan, from the builder's point of view, what are some of your key challenges?
Obviously, Dan, there's quite a few, but I suppose one of the key one is we operate in a very complex and often very fragmented supply chain. So obviously we source products, thousands of products on an average site from pretty much anywhere globally. And in reality, most contractors and developers whilst we specify products, we actually don't physically buy very much ourselves. We're very reliant on our supply chain to do so. So you look at, we would subcontract to a tier 2, but behind that, you've got merchants, you've got agents, you've got importers, you've got fabricators that all sit between us and the manufacturers of products. So it can really create a lot of issues in terms of tracking the product through that supply chain and making sure that as they pass through all those hands, that we've got continuity of the right product to ensure that we've got visibility. So the visibility and control, when we're talking about so many different people, is really difficult to monitor. And what we need is this, okay, well, I'm sure we'll hear it a few times today, but the golden thread to make sure we can link those elements together. So clear identification through that process is really critical to us.
No, thank you, Dagan, and thank you for being the first to use the phrase golden thread. As you say, I'm sure it'll come up a few more times, which I think leads well on to then, Kath, and your view then on having to actually use these things after it's all been put in place.
Thank you, Dan. And firstly, let me say thank you for inviting me to the panel. I have noticed over the last 12 to 18 months, I seem to be on more and more panels where you get the entire value chain in the built environment together. That's quite a new thing, actually. So I think that's really positive that we're all talking together now, because normally we don't get invited to the party, so I'm very pleased to be here. This is a really, this is the nux of the problem for me. So I can speak for Mighty, but I've worked in a lot of other firms as well. So from a Mighty perspective, we've got over 500 million assets in our database. Most of those are aged assets on aged estates. So we manage everything from Sellafield through to the defence estate, through to Vodafone, Sky, all different types of customers with different estates. But universally, we have a huge issue in trying to make sure that data is up to date, properly classified, and is accurate, really. And so if you think what that means for us, we're probably doing around 300,000 reactive work orders a day. So we're sending engineers out and tradespeople to go out to 300,000 tasks a day with all that data behind it. And they always come up against an asset of some sort, and they always want the information about that asset. So it's a monster challenge. And that is just Mighty, of course, and many other FM providers. So just the volume of data is huge. Classification of data is very inconsistent still. It's improving, but aged estate, it's really inconsistent. You know, we've not really had proper classification systems for that long, and lots of the buildings we are looking after will be 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years old. So it's a huge challenge to bring that all up to date. And so we spend a lot of time surveying assets and capturing that data, when actually, you know, you would think that there'd be a more streamlined way to do that. So that's a huge challenge, is capturing the data and the volume of the data. I think there's two things that are becoming really important now. One is customers really trying to define the event triggers. So when do you really want the data about that asset or that product? Because actually, sometimes now we see, especially with the new build handbook, we get overwhelmed with data that we don't really need. So there's inefficiency and waste in that system, and I think customers need to really take a step back and go, what do I really need? Not just give me everything, Dagan, and I'll give it all to Kath and she'll work out what I need. That's creating complexity. The second thing, which is much more important, all our customers are now asking us about carbon, and it's really difficult to assess the carbon calculations across our products. And that is the number one priority for me, is to try and make sure that we can do that, because if we can't get that baseline, we don't know how we're going to improve. So those are my challenges, and they are big, hairy challenges, I'm afraid. So it's going to take a lot of work to get where we need to get to.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I can only promise that we'll solve half of them today, not all of them.
That would be great.
No, it's interesting, and I can see some questions are coming through which tie in, which is great. So keep those questions coming in, and we'll try and line them up as best as possible. So generally, out of those challenges, that I mean, some of the things I picked up common between you all are linking back to the interactions between other actors in the process, and actually some of the complexities in sheer volume and amount of stuff that we've got. So maybe what I'll start with then is, Dagan, to yourself. Given that design and build processes are changing at the moment as well, we've got, as Kath mentioned there, the carbon agendas coming through. We've had COP26 this year. There are changes in legislation that are taking place. We are seeing, to be frank, the most significant regulatory reform in the built environment that we've had, I think, since any of us have been alive. So as part of that, how are we actually changing to respond to some of this? And I'll tie it in as well with a question we've had through from Peter, which is, and what levels of traceability are we actually looking for to resolve that as well as part of it? Because as Kath said there, sometimes you get too much information as part of it. So what is actually the right level to solve some of these things? I wondered what some of your thoughts are.
Right, I'm trying to remember the bigger question in the middle of this. You're exactly right, lots and lots of issues. Completely agree with Kath that sustainability, carbon footprint, embodied carbon, whole life cycle carbon is really critical. If we looked at, for us, as a developer working predominantly in London and the South East, albeit elsewhere in the country as well, the Greater London Authority now needs us to undertake whole life carbon assessment at the beginning of the process. Means we must know a lot more about product right at the very beginning. We need a circular economy statement, so we need a bill of quants for that. So we need early visibility of materials and accurate data. So in terms of what kind of specifics, for me, again, I think Kath was great in terms of it's not generic data we need anymore, it's product specific data. It's accurate data, so we make sure that we're getting the right information at the right stage. For me personally, down to batching, because we often have issues with batch, and you need to get back to recall. But other things that we noted at the moment that are going on, so we've got the building safety regulations that are going to be coming out at some point, almost certainly going to mean that we need to bring a lot of the design process and the product selection earlier than we ever have done before. So all of a sudden, we're going to have to say, well, we are buying product at a stage where possibly stage 3 design, where normally it'd be mid-stage 4. So we need to understand product in a fundamentally different way and make sure that what we design is actually what we build through that process. So the continuity. You then look at things like Grenfell and what's going to come out. Grenfell for me is a lot about competence. Competence about product selection, competence about product storage, competence about product installation, that whole piece. But again, it comes back to, for me, that the fact that we are talking about nailing product at the beginning of the process and ensuring what we've designed is what we end up building. So, in terms of things to look out for me, what's really critical, I'm sure, again, we'll talk about it today, but the Construction Product Association product code, in terms of making sure that the data starts as something that's accurate and reliable. So internally, we talk about quite often about the single source of truth. Where do we get this truth from? Can we make sure we're all talking about the same data in the same way? So a lot of things at the moment about EPD, so the latest certification in terms of carbon, are we getting that in the right way? So single source of truth, using manufacturer specific information. As I said, really, we do need the batch detail, we need the carbon detail, we need build quality assurance information within it, we need all of those things. But ultimately, this is about having a robust process that can track everything through a sequence of events and that can be accessed by all stakeholders in the process. So we have to remember that construction is a team activity. There's a vast number of people at a multitude of levels who are engaged in it, and we all need to be talking in the same way using a common data set. So for me, having the interface with a common data set is the critical thing to making sure that we can all deliver on these hugely changing times at the moment.
No, that's great. Thank you, Jacob. So interestingly, some of the bits to pull out of that, and we're being flooded with questions, which is great. So I'll actually jump into one of the audience questions now, which I'll start with you, Jacob, just to balance off that. But if anyone else on the panel wants to jump in, then please do. Is from Stacey, talking about this idea of that obviously what we're talking about, more record keeping, increased site management control and these sorts of things sound like they are vital to achieve what we're talking about because of the increased importance that these products will play. But actually then it'll also then drive up maybe costs then from the actual
I think for me at the moment, the fact that we need to automate in a single data environment. And so, yes, there'd be an element of more work, but if we're talking about things like BSI Identify, we're talking about automating scanning, QR codes with RFID tags and other bits. So personally, we're looking at this as something that should save energy and save time, because you're not making sure that everything is responsible purely at the coalface on site. You're bringing some of that process back into a more centralized control and using a common data platform. So from where we're sitting, we don't see this as adding burden. We're seeing this as taking away from a lot of the burden that sits with site at the moment. They have to decide, is that the right product? They have to check, is it being installed in the right way? These systems and technology should be able to help.
Brilliant, thank you. Kath.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in here because I think there's something really fundamental we have to change in the industry. There's a whole life cost of an asset, but there's a whole life cost of data management as well. And I think because the way that the procurement systems work, you've got very much siloed procurement between construction and operations, and indeed often design as well, actually. So you've got these silos of buckets of procurement, and the impact of the false economy of not investing in proper data management during the design and construction phase is not understood by customers when they get into the operational phase. So there's a huge cost of failure that we have to mop up in operations if we don't get the right information at the front end. And that cost can be financial cost, it can be risk, it can be reputation. So if I was a customer, I would be very much trying to make sure that golden thread was priced throughout the life cycle of a job in the same way that the maintenance is priced in now, or the carbon. It is an absolute false economy not to front load data management in the built environment. And I just think that the procurement systems keep reinforcing this problem. Everybody wants everything as cheap as possible at every stage, but actually there is then there's leakage into operations of poor data management cost. And it's not very well understood. But it's absolutely there. If Dagan handed me over a building today without the right data, I would have to spend a fortune surveying that building, uploading it into my CAFM system manually, no doubt. It's just it's so frustrating, as you can probably tell. The second thing is that I think we all need to be much more collaborative in that front end. So what you said earlier, Dagan, about, it's a team effort. It absolutely is. At the end of the day, we're putting together a kit of parts, really, and we do that collaboratively in a complex supply chain. The earlier that the supply chain can become involved in product selection and supporting the design, the better. But these are not new ideas, are they? We've been banging on about this since Egan, so I hope that there's some imperative for us to actually do it soon.
No, thank you, Kath. And yeah, these aren't new ideas, but I think it does take us. We are a big, complex, churning beast for things. And Carl, I see you've got your hand up, and we're vigorously nodding through a lot of that. So feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it's just really to support the position of Dagan and Kath, and from a designer's perspective, all too often we're not actually collecting data in a structure that is actually going to feed in directly to the construction process, or from that into the operations process. This is one of the things that certainly Ccpi at my chartered institution have been looking at, is the consistency of the data container. So one piece of data is always the same piece of data. It's not something that just has a similar name, which makes it very, very difficult to operate across. And also there's a thing about the trustworthiness of data. Until we get to some point where I think we'll be looking more at blockchain solutions, which we're some way away from yet, we need to have some sort of understanding of the trustworthiness of data, the veracity and the accuracy of the data, which, while all too often the information is there, is not necessarily always made available.
Can I just come back in there? That's a really excellent point. We never get any data that's validated by anybody, really. It's never guaranteed or validated. So that becomes our risk, which means that we have to survey it. So you can give me a beautiful Kobe drop, you can give me all the data you want, but if it's not validated, I've got to go and have a look to make sure that what is there is what is is reflected in the data. So I think that that's very, very crucial. Unvalidated data is not worth anything to us. So that's a huge challenge, I know, but it's something we've got to fix.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old adage that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Now, Adam, I see your hands up, so I'll let you in. Then I'm going to have to move on to my next question.
Well, hopefully this probably might link to your next question, because I've got to talk. If you're talking about accuracy of information, then I've got to talk about the code for construction product information. You know, the code has been brought in specifically to create an environment where people can trust the information that they receive about construction products, and particularly that information is clear, accurate, up-to-date, accessible and unambiguous. And product manufacturers over the next 12 to 18 months will be getting verified and effectively registered with the code. And, you know, once you know that you have that information, you can trust and you rely upon it, it's how do you get it into the hands of the people that really need it when they need it. So this whole principle about identify, getting back to the technical data sheet, 20 stories up a building on hanging on the outside on a mast climber or something, and just being able to go zap, now I know what I've got in front of me. And I think those two go really, really hand in hand. I'd also think about this, competence was mentioned earlier. Competence and product information are the yin and yang to each other. There's no point having fantastically competent people and giving rubbish information because they can't do their job. But equally, it's no point producing spot on information if the people who use it aren't competent to do so.
No, that's a good point, Adam. And in which case, then I will take advantage of your segue, and let's talk a little bit about the CCPI. Obviously, because I understand it, you were involved in the market integrity group created by CPA to actually develop the code with its main 11 points on that, actually how to do these things. So I guess, for any manufacturers listening or people who are interested in the code itself, do you think the code will help with better product traceability? And actually, what are some of the solutions out there that might help someone conform to the CCPI or guidance therein?
Thank you. You've only got 35 minutes left, so I won't take all the time up. So in terms of product traceability, when you're trying to trace the product back, you got to ask yourself why you're trying to do that. And what you want to do is you want to understand what the product is. You want to understand what you've got in front of you, what the product attributes are, what the product performance is. And so traceability has to take you back to something. And so the code is about it taking you back to clear, accurate, up-to-date, accessible and unambiguous information. So if you are taken back to a code verified manufacturer, then you can absolutely trust that information, and that's absolutely key for me.
No, that's fine. And then to follow on, there's a question here from John talking about actually surely not every manufacturer is going to sign up to the CCPI. So as part of this, in the same way that not everyone has a certification to ISO 9001. So,
but that's true. But on any project worth its ilk, if you're not accredited to ISO 9001, it's likely that the main contractor is not going to appoint you. So the issue with CCPI for me is all the people that we talk to, the main contractors, the house builders to government procurement, want to know that they can trust the information that they're using on their buildings. Nobody wants another Grenfell. Nobody wants to put product on a building that they think is going to do X, but actually it only performs to Y. So we're hearing, and there is a supporters category in CCPI which will go live next year once enough manufacturers have come through the process, and there's hundreds now registered to come through the process, where companies are going to say, as part of our core supply chain, you have to be CCPI verified, and if you are not, we will not allow you on our projects. And I think this is really, really key. And what we're asking manufacturers to do, you had GDPR, everyone had to do it. You've got, various different things that we all have to conform to. And we could have made this legislative, but we didn't want to. We wanted to give the industry time to get their arms around it. If you're a manufacturer and you are credible and you want to be taken seriously and you want to work with people in a way that you can be trusted and that your information can be trusted and can be used, then simply put, you need to be CCPI verified. And you asked me a question before about tips. Just get your heads around it. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's basically a good sign-off process, somebody taking responsibility technically to sign off that the information is correct. And if you make a statement of performance about your product, you've got to be able to prove it and demonstrate that. Consider the whole life chain of the product from an information perspective and make sure your people are competent to talk about the information that you've got.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Carl, I see you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit on. People probably notice there's all sorts of moving parts in our industry at the moment. We talk about Identify and Ccpi and the Lexicon project and things like that. And I think if you actually look at them holistically and see how this meshes together, I think that actually is quite an interesting story. So, for example, we have Identify. This is how you find the information. We have Lexicon. This is the format of the information. We have Ccpi. This is how you can trust the information. And I think when we look at those things together, I think then we have a more holistic response to what it is that we need to do as an industry to stop having all of these. I'm trying to use my words carefully. I don't want to use the word disaster because not everything is a disaster, but there are issues and there are problems that could very easily be avoided. And sadly, some of them are disasters.
No.
Can I jump in there, Dan? I mean, I think it's a really interesting question about why would people use it? Why would they use this? I'm a bit agnostic on the actual solution, but what I do believe is that we've had a chronic problem, really chronic illness in our whole built environment around poor quality data and information management for donkey's years, forever really. I think that there are two massive catalysts for change now. One, very sadly, is Grenfell and the consequences of the issues around information management on that particular night, which were tragic. But the second is sustainability and carbon capture. And from a safety and sustainability perspective, there is a massive catalyst for change. So I guess if we hadn't got those two catalysts, we might have this chronic problem for another 10 years, perhaps, because it seems to me that nobody in the past was able to see the value. Because this has been possible for quite a long time. We've had cloud computing, we've had BIM, we've had all that good stuff for a long time, decades, and we still haven't done it. So to me, I think it's not a question of why people wouldn't do it. I think it's a question of people understanding that they now have to do it. And that there are really excellent reasons that are to do with, real human impact here if we don't do this. So I think the product will sell itself because I do think customer demand is going to be massive. We're already seeing that customer demand in our world about we need information about this and that and where is it coming from. We see that all the time now. So I think the customer demand is the thing that will change it, and that is being driven by the events in our industry and the events to come in terms of climate crisis that we have to step up to.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you, Kath. And we've on some of those points, and also we've been all very friendly on this discussion panel so far. And I think it would be remiss of me not to try and attempt some sort of discord, although I won't try too hard. So a lot of conversation has been about making sure people get the right information, making sure that, and some of the questions are relating to things like information relating to safety. We've talked a few times now about getting the right carbon sort of information coming through. So Carl, I'll ask you then from the designer side, the membership of Ccpi when they do their work, I assume look at manufacturers' information to then do things right to those design specifications. You said, for example, start with the generic and move to the specific. Is the problem then that you're not getting what you want from manufacturers? And what I'll say is I'll give Adam the heads up that you can respond back to whatever Carl says. But are you not getting what you actually need? Is that the problem? Is that why then Kath doesn't get the information at the end, because you're not getting the right information to inform your work?
From my time in practice, which was 30 odd years, we've always been able to get the information. It's always there and it's always available. It's trapped in documents or folders or PDFs. I'm of a vintage where we used to have folders of catalogues on the walls, and you would go and look up the information in the catalogue and then completely mistype it or write it on a drawing, and that will be the information that is exchanged. And we haven't essentially moved on very far from that. Okay, we've got websites now and we've got readable PDFs, but there's still a whole bunch of information that is trapped and is not exchanged. As a designer, I don't send manufacturers' design specifications to the constructor, because as a building services engineer, I'm only making suggestions. I'm not saying that this is definitely the product you need to install. That's a matter for the contractor. But we do have this information. It's just in a form that isn't usable. And to echo some of the points made earlier, which is along the lines of, we don't need all the information, we just need the information relevant to our task, which I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing a little there, but the point holds. I think if we have the facility to exchange as much verifiable or verified information as possible, and then allow people to filter it according to their task, so they're not swamped by loads of stuff that has no meaning to them, then I think we're moving in a better direction. This is certainly one of the aspects of BIM that we've been looking at for over a decade now. I've been involved in all of the BIM standards to one degree or another, but it doesn't seem to be what has happened. What has happened is the same as it ever was, which is, I've got a bunch of information, I'm going to put it into this basket and lob it over the wall to the next person down the line, which is not overly helpful. So that would be my perspective on what we have. Yes, we do have it. Do we manage it well? No, we don't. Do we allow the people further down the supply chain any sort of chance of deciphering what the heck it is we've given them? No, we don't.
Thank you. Adam, I could see your face smile and maybe contort at times at that.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, look, Carl, it's a really good point. Like, I think one of the things that comes out of there, and I'm kind of slightly read between the lines of what you say, is actually a lot around handover of information through the supply chain, through the time of the project. And what we're getting actually is a lot of, the designer designs at one stage of the project, but at various stages, other people need that information. And do you know what? That information changes. So the two things that I kind of really come in, hone in from the code background, one is about accessibility, being able to get hold of the information quickly, when you need it, where you need it. But the other one, which is really important, is up-to-date information, version control stuff. So we talk about product substitution, and some people think it's good and some think it's bad. Well, it depends why you're doing it and when you're doing it. But in essence, if the engineer at the beginning states that he wants a product that will perform to a certain set of criteria, and 18 months later, other products have come onto the market, technology is improved, and the contractor feels that he should change it, that's fine, as long as he can very quickly get hold of the information to prove that what he's substituting to performs at least as well in the criteria specified as the product that he's changing from. And fundamentally, one of the things I love about BSI Identify, if a product changes and goes through version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the QR code on the product will always report back to the data sheet for that product when it was made. So if that product is 2 years old, you've still got that data sheet to compare to, and then look at the product that you're using now. And I think that's really, really, really important. So product information to help substitution not change the performance criteria of the building in a negative way is, for me, absolutely fundamental.
Oh, great. And what I'll mention, only because I've seen some stuff come through some of the questions, I think it came through when Kathy, you were talking earlier, and as a prompt as well, Dagan, I appreciate we're all talking about the constructors and we haven't given you a chance to jump in there. But there's also the difference between what is up-to-date information and relevant at-date information as well, because while things might update, you also need to get to the original information when things might have changed. So this archive, this record, the audit trail is just as relevant as part of that. So it's very interesting, Adam, you brought up obviously the idea that you can go back and see what was relevant for that batch and those elements and that product at that time. But I mean, Dagan, we're talking an awful lot about things like all the substitutions and stuff the constructors do, and how design intent doesn't get passed through, and the issues at handover and these sorts of things. So I'll give you an opportunity to jump in and defend the constructors.
I think, Adam, you're very polite by saying product substitution. We normally default to the value engineering analogy. But yes, I think part of the industry is very much about design product A. We then have some commercial constraints, some operational constraints, particularly knowing that the market in the last kind of 18 months in terms of product availability, we've seen a vast amount of products being swapped out for others that are more readily available or at a better cost. I think that the key issue here is, how do we track that product through its process? How do we track that what we've designed is actually what we've ended up using? So for us, we're talking about being able to have something that's really simple. So we've got to bear in mind that the people who count on a site when we're contracting and actually building, we need to be able to access information in a really simple, straightforward manner. So we need a single device that can access, whether it's technical information, whether it's install information, whether it's packaging information, a simple way of doing that. But ultimately what we're aiming for is to be able to look at, if that particular UPIN code, if we looked at identify, embedded in a BIM model on day one, how has that changed through the process? And when we get to actually flagging that's what's been installed, and we get to our as-built drawings, can we map what we built all the way back through to what was the intent when we designed it? So for us, it is that full team. So when we go from Carl at the beginning looking at, well, this is what we think we need, all the way back, then we'll source it from Adam. We'll actually build it and we pass it over to Kath at the end. We need continuity of information that's used. And even if the actual product changes, if we've got continuity of information showing why it changed, that's really the panacea for where we're aiming to be.
No, great. Thank you, Dagan. And the questions come through which build on that a little. And then I think actually, Kath, it might be good to hear your view on this as well. Is that so Rob's asked about the fact that obviously if it's unvalidated information, then it's not of any use. But it's also really difficult if you have got accurate information that isn't accessible as part of that. And you've started talking about some instances there, Dagan, about obviously if you are, if you're on site, if you're doing other bits and pieces, and actually, so how important is it to have that easy, persistent access to that information?
Yeah.
And then, Kath, I guess I'd ask you then, as a follow-on onto that, you talked about all your aged assets, so I'd wonder your perspective on that after I've given Dagan a chance to comment.
Yeah.
So Dan, so this is in terms of making sure we have access to the right information. For us, it comes back to a phrase I think we already quoted. It was kind of single source of the truth. What happens behind the scenes in terms of system integration, we don't mind, but the average person on site, can they press a really simple kind of couple of buttons and find the right information formatted in a usable, friendly manner? So quite often we get a technical sheet that comes through that's dozens of pages long, and you're trying to search through it, finding that the right line of data that you specifically need. What we need is to be able to almost compartmentalize those and go straight to, that's the piece of information we need, that's what I want. So if I want to see, is this the right product? How is it packaged? The packaging being key. How do I actually then install it? Another thing that's key. How do I maintain it? So one of the things is, are we storing it outside? Are we not storing it outside? Can it be left in different temperature conditions? All of those things, but I want to be able to press one or two buttons, ideally on a single iPad or similar device, and get straight to that particular issue. But I want it to link back to every other piece of data that might be relevant to the whole breadth of the team involved in the process.
No, great, thank you. So yeah, and obviously as we've talked about a little there, something like BSI Identify can give that for products that have had those things put in place. So for example, you could scan it and get some of that information. But of course, for the, I'm trying to remember the right number you gave me, Kat. I think it was 500 million assets that I assume no one's retroactively gone through and stuck QR codes and RFID chips into all of those assets on your behalf. So
yeah, I mean, so I gave you the wrong number. It should be 5 million. We manage 500 million square meters of real estate, so I've exaggerated slightly, but 5 million is still quite a lot. So forgive me, that slip of tongue. One day it will be 500 million. But so we do collect data on all that. We have got data on all those assets. We have to, because we can't maintain them otherwise. It's just the level of data, the quality of the data, and the accessibility. So, Dagan, I think you're absolutely right. For the perfect data set is accurate, really accessible, and has the right level of detail for the task you're undertaking, and is relevant. So, accurate, accessible, and relevant are the three bits of the Venn diagram for me of the data. The issue the fundamental thing for me is, why can't people validate data? I don't understand it. Why can we not have validated data sets handed over? There's a huge reticence, which I think we all have to own up to. We do it too, we don't validate data when we transfer it. in the FM industry to another FM contractor. So what is holding us back? And I imagine it's risk that is holding us back. That's the fundamental thing for me. Until we can get to a point where the industry, all facets of the industry, are prepared to validate the data they're handing over is accurate, accessible, and relevant, I don't really see us moving forward, because we'll still end up going out trudging around buildings, barcoding and looking at things to make sure it actually is the Dakin asset and it's not something else. And I'm really interested in what you bring up, Dagan, about value engineering, because that's a huge problem. It's cost engineering, really, isn't it? Let's face into that. And that's driven by the fact that we're building really complex, bespoke things for customers that are going to last for 60 years at least, most of them. And yet we do that for 1 or 2% margin. So it's an incredibly undervalued process. And I think that is what is one of the things that is really driving the lack of ability for us to really, really validate that data and put that effort and time in. And, you know, even someone in the audience brought up the fact that this is going to bring cost into our process. So I think it's a big challenge. So the more we can facilitate accessibility and accuracy and indeed validation through software, and the better, because I don't think we're ever going to be able to hand crank this.
No, it's a very good point. And you know, I see some questions and or comments are coming in on value engineering and product substitution, and I will remind everyone in our audience that this is a webinar on product traceability. But thank you for your views, and I think we all have our own on the way these things work. But that's why things like the Construction Innovation Hub and others are working at things like value definitions, and you know.
I think there is a link though, Dan, because we could have a perfectly traceable product that's in the design phase, and that's not what gets installed. So we end up with good product traceability for the wrong blooming product. So we have that as well. We have really great, lovely Gucci models, and then when you go in there, it's like, well, that's not what's been put in.
But isn't that?
There is a link between those things, I'm afraid.
But isn't that the beauty of BS Identifies, that the site manager can go and check just by scanning the product, so see straight away that he's got what he was expecting.
Yeah, and I think
you can open it up, Adam, but yes.
Well, I think interestingly, it deals into two sides of substitution. There's known substitution, so obviously the constructor could turn around and actually decide through a value engineering process to swap something out. But then there's also what might be the illegitimate substitutions, where you've ordered something and actually what you've been given is an alternative product by a supplier who's then trying to save money by providing the bronze product instead of the gold product, or those sorts of things. So I guess, Dagan, from your point of view, how often or have you seen instances where someone has tried to actually install something that was the wrong product that actually wasn't part of value engineering as part of that? And what are some of the ways that we can mitigate that?
Unfortunately, as part of the industry, we deal with hundreds of thousands of products being installed on sites, you know, across the world, globally. For me, it could be everything from a simple kind of block paver, where you specify a particular block paver that's particularly hard wearing. It can take a huge amount of load. It looks extremely similar to a lot of other block pavers. How do you know it's the right one that's been installed? Are you there the day that it turned up? Has it got packaging that's labelled in the right way? How do you actually check it's the right product? Because you're not going to be an expert. You're dealing on site with thousands of different products. You might know roughly what that thing looks like. But how do you check it is exactly the product that you've ordered? So does it happen on site? Yes, I'm sure it does, on a very regular basis. Do we try and mitigate that risk? Yes, we do, as much as humanly possible. But the key bit here is quite often there's a lot of products that aren't labelled outside the packaging themselves. So for me, that's where one of the USPs to identify is that you can track a product when it comes through the gates in terms of the packaging. Yes, that's what we ordered. And then you'll have RFID tags or others potentially embedded in the product itself to validate, and it's the product itself that's coming in. So those are real USPs that are super critical at the moment, because we have to bear in mind very, very few people have absolute finite expertise at installing every single product on a project. If you substitute product A to B, do you really know without the right identification on it that it has been substituted. It's very doubtful at the moment, and certainly post Grenfell, that is becoming more and more critical. We have to make sure that we're installing what it is we've specified.
Well, no, exactly. And I've seen some comments coming through of, I think, 1 or 2 examples of people who have tried to substitute various systems and things as well as part of that. An interesting comment has come through, which is obviously it's great when you can, QR code a product, like maybe a block pavia or something like that. Or I mean, that would look aesthetically quite interesting. But what about when it's things like blown materials or things like mineral wool and those sorts of things? How do we try and trace those sorts of products? I guess 1, that are hidden, and 2, that might be cut or formed into the shape they appear in a building or a piece of works.
A lot of it for me is being able to track things as they come through the gate. So we know what we've ordered, we know the quantity that we've ordered them in or should be requiring them in. Has that physically come through the gate? So what we really need is, for me, identify would really work when everybody uses it. So we know everything comes through the gate, it's got a tag on it, and we know has what we've ordered actually come through. Because you're right, when we get a roll of rock wool or something like that, how do we know that the component is actually what it should be? We have to scan it in its packaging format. So for me, it's one of the key things that really attracted us about it is it's the packaging and it's the product which would be identified.
No, great, thank you. Carl, I'll invite you in a second. I just noted that I remember a conversation with some, the way that some of improved installers work, where they're having to take evidence while they do installations, and actually being able to say, take photos of the packaging, take a photo of then the product in situ sort of thing as part of getting the evidence up is one of the ways that some of these things are mitigated. So that chimes well with that, Dagan. So thank you. Carl.
It's a previous experience from a previous life I had when I worked for a Ministry of Defence contractor. We used to make weapon systems. And we talk about product traceability in construction. Every single thing that goes into the weapons that are manufactured in the UK can be traced back to a hole in the ground. And that is true for every single thing that goes into it. So this is doable. Rocket science has done it, literally. And this was something that we were doing nearly 40 years ago now. So construction is probably about 40 years behind the times, but it's doable. It can be done. And I think one of the comments you often hear is, well, it's too difficult, or why has no one else done this? Well, other people have done this and it's not too difficult and we can do it. That's the point I would like to make.
I agree with that, Carl, and that's what I was saying earlier. It's not being done because it's not a priority. It's not because we haven't got the capability, the software, the intelligence in the market. It's just never been that much of a priority, if we're honest, for anybody. And now I think with the changing conditions that we face, it really is a huge priority. So it's obviously clearly a priority when you're designing a nuclear warhead.
Well, no, exactly, and it's I think it's understanding that. I'm conscious that we are nearing the end of our discussion panel, so so that we don't rush out some last thoughts more. So I guess first I will take the opportunity to say thank you for all of you for joining the panel, and what I wouldn't mind from each of you, and Adam, I'll start with you first, so you can think of your view for this, is maybe what is the one top tip, advice, or where someone should go next if they are thinking about product traceability as part of this. So the idea being effectively that we're going to give everyone who is attending almost a call to action as part of it. So it's not just they've heard the views, but actually where can they go to find out more or something to support their journey. So I'll ask that from each of you, and you can point to whatever you think is most useful, and we will take it from there. So I guess Adam, from yourself, what is your last top tip and where should people go for help?
Thanks, Dan. When we were doing the code and in all the consultations that it did, not a single manufacturer pushed back on it being the right thing to do. It's time for the product manufacturers to really get the house in order, for us to reinforce that we have a credible, trustworthy industry and that we do things right. There are 3 things. Go on to cpicode.org.uk, sign up for the code, do the things you need to do. Every organization has to raise the bar, get yourself clear, accurate, accessible, up-to-date, unambiguous information. Secondly, do BSI identify. It's so easy, it's so brilliant, it's so useful to the customer at all points of the chain to have that UPIN code, to be able to scan, to be able to see the product you've got. And thirdly, I think it is important from the traceability point of view, all products should be batch numbered, date and time, line made on. If ever there's a problem, we should know where that is. I think that's really, really important for all manufacturers. Those are the three things that we're addressing in our organisation. I know many, many other manufacturers are doing. It's just time to get our act together. This industry is too good to not do so.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Carl, from yourself, what is your top tip and where people should go for more?
From my perspective, and this I really hope will apply across construction completely, structure your data. And don't structure it in a way that you think is the right way to do it. Structure it in the way that is actually already written in the standards or some commonly available methodology, because that means that your data will work with all of the other data on a project across the life cycle. That is adding value. When you add value to the data that you share, you're adding value to your clients. You're doing a good service. And I think that is going to be one of the things going forward that is going to be the most important, is how does that data fit together? Not just is it available.
No, well, that's great. And where might someone go as well, if you've got one?
There are several simple things. I mean, there's product data templates. Ccpi have our BIMHawk platform for building services products. We're also working together with the CPA on the Lexicon project for the wider construction industry, and we hope to have more on that in the near future. And there are several other methods by which you can share structured data, but go to the standards first is my suggestion.
Thank you, Carl. Dagan, how about yourself? Tip and where someone should maybe go to find out more?
So the key bit for me is thinking data in terms of end-to-end, but end-to-end in terms of the construction process and end-to-end in terms of the supply chain. And the supply chain being everything from the concept all the way through to the build and maintain piece. So I think looking at that in a continuity is really critical. I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is that capturing data helps us with all of the things that are coming out. We touched on it earlier in terms of post-Grenfell being robust in terms of product selection, value engineering correctly. All of those elements are reliant on key data. And I suppose one of the key messages for me, and I know Adam mentioned it a moment ago, but as an industry, we need the critical mass of manufacturers to buy into this. Without manufacturer support, this doesn't work. It is so simple, it is so easy, it is going to create so many benefits on so many levels. We just need the big manufacturers to get it. The big manufacturers get it, everyone else will follow.
Brilliant, thank you. So you're supporting Adam then on looking at the code and BSI Identify as part of where things to go and things to look at next?
Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. And to finish us off, Kath.
Well, obviously I absolutely applaud and reinforce everything everyone said so far. For me, I think this is a brilliant development in the market and will be massively useful for us eventually when we do receive all this information, so it's very encouraging. I think the tip I would probably ask everybody to think about is how much can you collaborate? Can you bring in the FM supplier to the client? Don't wait for the client to ask you to do it. Don't just look at your narrow scope. Whatever part of the supply chain or the built environment you're in, I think we should all be encouraging our customers to bring more collaboration and to bring all their partners across the whole life cycle together. And I think we each can drive that wherever we are in the supply chain, we can drive that collaboration. So that's a behavioural thing, I think. I'm thinking more and more now, it's for the industry to lead rather than government or, perhaps customers. It's for the industry must step up and innovate and lead now for the sake of where we need to be in the future. So I think collaborate and talk to each other much more and bring other parts of the supply chain in as early as you can. In terms of, this whole thing for me is very driven by standards and process, which is the right thing. I think I'd be encouraging people to look at ISO 19650 to see if you can become compliant with that. And because that will drive you towards things like this product identifier solution, because you'll then need to find solutions. It's a really good framework. The UK BIM Alliance is a really good place to go and have a look at those standards in the UK BIM framework. It's not just BIM, actually, it's digital information management framework. So I would perhaps just encourage everybody to go and skill themselves up on that and start understanding what it really means. But most of all, I think we just need to collaborate more and talk to each other more. So as I said at the beginning, it's brilliant to be on a panel with representatives from the whole of the supply chain, because this is what we need a lot more of.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Kath. And I'm also aware that BISRIA have some good guidance on soft landings and stuff, which ties it in with everything we've been talking about.
All out there, yeah.
No, brilliant. In which case, then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw our discussion to a close with 2 minutes to spare by the look of it. So what I'll do is I'll like to thank everyone who's attended and all the questions you've asked. So I've got some. Hopefully we've gone through most of those questions as we've been going. So thank you for submitting those and making my job much easier as part of that. And I'll just give a quick thank to our panelists. So thank you very much, Adam Turk, CEO from Siderise. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Carl Collins, Head of Digital Engineering at Ccpi. Thank you to Dagan Herkelson, Head of Supply Chain at Berkeley Group. And lastly, thank you to Kath Fontana, Managing Director at Mighty PLC. I hope that's right. I hope you've all enjoyed, and I hope you have a great rest of your respective days.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.